Hello everybody and welcome back. This time doing something a little bit completely different. This is going to be in the Let's Mod series, and it's going to be a little bit about talking about, of course, how to sculpt, and by extension I think texture mountains. So I'm gonna jump around a little bit all over the place. Hopefully the videos on North Vale will be out, but this will give you an idea of kind of how I go about texturing and how I go about doing some of the terrain work. So you have to understand that in WoW there are a lot of, and probably more so now that you're looking at the newer expansions. I don't really have a lot of interest in those because I haven't played the new game in a really long time. So we're going to be looking at what I'm exposed the most to, so that will be vanilla methods, it'll be the Burning Crusade, it'll be Wrath of the Lich King, and some other tidbits of me, for example, like playing around in Cataclysm or a bit of Mist of Pandaria. But anyways, what I want to take a look at right now is mountains, and as you can see, we're in the back of North Vale. One of the important things that you really need to understand and start using if you're new to Noggit is you need to look at the elevation tool. Now, the elevation tool will allow you to mark these lines which tell you exactly where the elevation is. So this would allow you to see, for example, like this is roughly on the same elevation, then it goes down and further down and back up. So these rings allow you to know how far you're going in terms of elevation. Sometimes you can't tell. For example, like this bump, it won't necessarily tell you, but you can see that there is quite a bit. So I don't know. I generally think that it's about a meter to a meter and a half in regards to player models. Sometimes it might be an actual full player model height if you're a human. But anyways, it's important that you're aware of that. Now, I wanted to show you this side of the mountains here that I made. I'm also working without M2s present, so if I press this button, of course, you'll see all the M2 and the trees and whatnot. But for the purpose of terraining and working on terrain, I will usually disable them. That gives me a much easier way and a clear way of actually working on terrain. So this was a rough draft of the mountain, and as you can see, it's pretty sloppily done. So before we get into that, I'll kind of generally expose you to some of the basic shapes that you can get into. So one of the easiest things that you can do in WoW is just simply get into the collection of round shapes as the basis for your mountain, which is pretty much what I did. It's kind of like the basis of what they used in vanilla at first, and obviously every map developer or terrainer will have their own style, and you'll be able to tell how they make up the terrain in a way that they might prefer it. I have my certain ways of doing things. Some people might not like how those things look. Other people think that it's cool. I think I've gotten comments on both sides where I tend to like things being a little bit cartoony, in the sense that I think WoW in general and Warcraft in general is usually a cartoony, slightly exaggerated universe. So I like keeping things, if they're appropriate, to being, pretty funny. All right, let me just check one thing before we go. All right, so what am I doing right now? Well, what I'm doing right now is I'm going around the edges of the mountain elevation and I'm making sure that I am painting it with dirt, because dirt is going to be the base of any texturing work that you're going to do. So I'm going around the areas, the base of every elevation, and just making sure that I have a nice even layer of dirt. So see here, I've already started doing some texturing work. And in this case, I'm not starting from scratch. I'm starting from sort of like the pre-existing pattern that was there. So you can see all of this sort of like grainy stuff was terrain that was kind of half painted there. Apparently that they were thinking about developing that area and they never really did. So then I put my stuff on top of that, and then I'll modify and clean up as I see fit, which is the case of this particular mountain. Right. So let me take a look here. I'll just put a little bit more dirt around that. So we've got some pretty established chunks of elevations, which are the stone selection, the color that I want for this texture. Here, in fact, I'm just going to go, I'm not going to completely, but I'm going to darken it just a little bit, because you want the base of your mountains to be always it's sort of, you're going from the brightest type of pure shade down to almost just a hint of it. So I'm going to do that. It's not going to stay that way permanently, but that's the logic that you want to work yourself to. Right. So I was saying that there's different shapes that you can work towards. So one of the basic shapes that we can work in terms of mountain is just the simple circle. So I'm taking my tool, which is set at 45% pressure, and I'm just very lightly dabbing around what I think is going to be the base, and then I'm going to leave the pressure where I want that, but I'm going to decrease the size, and then I'm going to start painting a very strong center. Now, what that does, that does not look like much, but this is going to provide the basis of your elevation. I'm also going to make my outer brush for elevation a bit higher, and I'm just going to dab initially around the edges, just bringing it up a tiny bit. I'm going to go a bit down here and say, okay, I need to start bringing up the center a bit more. And then you see, as I slowly dab my way around, how that elevation comes into existence. All right, now I don't want anything huge, and I think that's fine. So this is the basic shape that you can get away with. The other thing, obviously, is if you're going to make a mountain, what I would recommend is, if you're working on something flat, that you look at it from above, and we'll take a look at this from above, right? And try and imagine this as it being flat. So I made some large circle, medium circle, small circle, large, medium circle, large circle, right? And this is all flat, and then I do exactly what I was doing here, which is I start to slowly elevate them, and I know the bigger circles are going to be the bigger jutting parts of the mountain, and I know that the medium ones will be medium. Now, when you finish that, it won't look like this. It'll be a bit more flat and irregular. So what you do once that is done is, you bring your brush to be really big, and then starting from the point of the mountain that you want to be big, you start bringing it all, and then they sort of start coning up together, but with their pre-existing elevations that you've given them, and that'll start building up the mountain. So that's what I did here. I brought all of these up into when they were a flat elevation, and then I used the larger tool to start bringing them up and giving them the shape of the mountain that I wanted. Right, so another thing that's important in my book to make sure is that you're interlacing shapes. So you're not just creating a line of um, of circles, right? Sometimes it might be fine, like I did that here. Okay, I did like large circles, but then you see how in the bottom, in between each two, I made sure to have these smaller, different size, you know, here a different shape altogether. And this is sort of just a cliff, so there's not much bump going on here. It's a bit of a cliff, and the same goes in on there. And there you end up with a fairly clean, kind of like cartoonish looking thing, which I think is fine for the color palette and for the zone. This is not something that's supposed to be very scary or dramatic. Here, a little less clean. I'll probably go over this once more, a bit more, maybe altering a couple more shapes and maybe adding a little bit more variation, but there you go, and you start working the way that you want. Now, these mountains are a combination of something that Blizzard had already pre-sculpted, which was pretty gnarly. It looked something like this. Right, so this is after I have gone over it a couple of times and sort of try and merge it to my style. You can see their style on the exterior here. And that's another thing that I actually want to take a look at with you and just show you how you can get into texturing when you've done something that's really inclined and you want to give it a bit of more texture or 3D-ness to it, and so we'll sculpt that. But first and foremost, let's get back into this, right? So again, I'm just going to go very softly, and I'm going to go around, inch around the edges of this, right? And I don't want shapes. I don't want to look like it's dabbed on, but I want there to be a bit of shade on the contours. Now this rock is pretty big, so we're going to come back to that, and I'll show you how we can do that to make it look better. But I want to go ahead, just go around these shapes and lightly dab, and we're starting to get those more realistic shades, or not realistic, but more appropriate shades of what we want. Again, here, this line is really, this is too big of a chunk, so we're going to have to break that up as well. And I'm going to come around to this area. As you can see here, this is a bit messy. It's leftover textures, so I'm going to go here. I'm going to paint over this. I'm going to paint over this like that. Then I'm going to take my stone texture, and I'm going to decide kind of more or less where I want to bring it. And I think, let's look at the curvature using these lines, and I can see, okay, so there's a steep incline here, so I probably want to do that there. And then here I'm starting to, and this is the top, so I want this to be just really solid, and then lightly feather out. Good. Now, not final, but you get the idea of what I'm sort of trying to aim at. And I'll come around and I'll actually fix that at some other point. I'm not going to go through the entire process of doing this entire mountain. I just wanted to show you some of the basics. But let's move on now to texturing the sides of something that is like heavily inclined. So these I did myself, and this is a different texturing method that you'll find. You'll find it a bit more in Wrath of the Lich King, but because I wanted a mountain path here and I didn't want to flatten these mountains out more, I decided to go for this particular style. So I'll show you how to go into this particular style, but I need to take a look at the mountain here first and see exactly what it is that I'm going to do for these sort of tighter texturing techniques. So first of all, I'm going to drop my radius down to 1. And I'm going to look at the mountain and say, okay, well, these are some pretty big chunks. And I can see here that there's a dimple. And I'm going to take advantage of that dimple. I'm just going to bring this up a little bit more. And I'm going to just draw the dimple there where I think it should come. And then I'm going to bring it here. As you can see it, right? It's right there. It's a product of probably moving the raise tool in one way and then the other. So I bring that line here, and then the question becomes, okay, well, where do I take it? Well, I want to do these softer, almost bulby. I don't want any sharp, jagged edges for these mountains. So I want to maybe bring this down over here and say, okay, well, this is going to be my line. And at the same time, I can also see that there's a drop here. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this bit out as well. Now, this is a little bit different than what I had shown you before, because this method is actually drawing over something that was already in existence. So this works well for when you've finished making your large elevations like these, and then you want to give them a little bit more character or a little bit more complexity.